Kia ora, hello. This week we are continuing to look at life in the medieval cities. Today we are going to discuss medieval crime and violence. This one will be a bit spicy for some people, so strap yourself in. I will be cleaning this up though, so it is suitable for a general audience, so just so you know. Before we move on, we have a giveaway to announce. This week, if you want to know how you can win these alls, or all of them, stay to the end of the video. As usual, these videos aim to try to discuss some of the common myths concerning the medieval period and compare these with reality. This one is going to be split between several episodes. The scope of information that I need to share is, well, overwhelming. I guess that means you get more content to watch then. Hooray! As usual, all links and sources are below. In this video, we'll be discussing what medieval crime looked like, how this differed to modern crimes, and was this period, well, more crimey? By this I mean, was the medieval period more dangerous? I think it is first helpful to discuss what was a crime in the medieval period. Once again, this is a difficult thing to answer since this period lasts 1,000 years. During that time, culture and society changes. To make this easier, we're confining our discussion to the late medieval period and the cities. There is a whole assortment of crimes in the late medieval period that we would be familiar with. Homicide and assault are common in this period. This is a time where people are all carrying arms, by which I mean weapons, for example, a knife or a sword. Due to the lack of modern medical technologies, death by injury would be common during this period as well. For example, John of Bury, a shoemaker, was found dead on Thursday the 12th of March 1339. He was found that he had been in a quarrel on the 22nd of February and struck in the head by a sword by Richard Lantiner, a sub-clerk, and had survived until the 11th of March, so quite a long period of time. When it came to homicide, there was a distinction between actions where there was malice of intention, so people setting out to commit homicide, homicide, and homicide in self-defense. Each of these crimes carried different penalties. Before we move on, I'm going to take a second to address a pet project of mine here. Well, because it's my video and I can do whatever I like. The late 13th century and early 14th century appears to have had a martial arts craze, much like the karate craze of the 60s and 70s. That is of the sword and buckler. This in itself is not an issue. However, what this led to was roving gangs of sword and buckler duelists roaming the city after dark, robbing and fighting each other, and you had opposing classes and schools fighting. This was so bad in places such as London, there was legislation on several occasions banning sword and buckler schools and arrests of people carrying sword and buckler after dark in city limits. So besides homicide and obviously the sword and buckler issues, we see the usual crimes of larceny, counterfeiting, forgery, and arson. So now we've discussed crimes we are aware of, I would like to take a moment to discuss some different crimes we may not be familiar with. First, we have mayhem, which is the intentional act or wanton removal of a body part that would impair someone of their ability to defend themselves in combat. How oddly specific. So, this is to mean an eye or a limb. Keep that in mind next time you decide to cause a little mayhem. Next, we have false accusation. As the legal system relied on testimony and witness as the bulk of evidence of a crime leading to arrest and prosecution, to falsely accuse someone of a crime would result in charges of your own. As we have covered in our video on medieval swearing, using bad speech was also a problem. For the medieval person, assault did not just include physical violence, language was violent too. To slander someone and to call their character into question was a violent action. To be called a thief, a liar, a false witness was just as bad as punching someone and would lead to fines or compensation being paid to the victim. Since we are busting some myths, I would like to take a moment here to address something that my research on the subject has brought up. that crime and violence in the medieval period was not just relegated to men. There is a myth that women in the medieval period was quiet and demure. Well, I'm sure that is just not true. Let's have a look at some of the crimes that women were up to. Women appear in court roles, although they are underrepresented. This could be for many different reasons. Crimes of a certain type or monetary value were often not recorded. Or as married couples were legally one person in the medieval period, husbands were held accountable for the violence of their wives. What picture we do have is one of larceny, which is theft of property. Women were less likely to take part in robberies, which is larceny with the use of force, but it did happen. So, what were women stealing? Women were stealing money, wool, grain, livestock, fur coats, and jewelry, whatever they could get, sometimes by themselves and other times in the company of men. It does not stop there. Women were also engaged in acts of violence. Often it appears they used whatever was ready to hand. This could be the use of knives, staves, or fists. Trends tend to show that women were engaged in violence against other women, although not at all times. Margaret Gay was fined for injuring William Leaderham by throwing him up against a post, while on a separate occasion, Margaret, wife of Hugh Spicer, threw stones and drew her knife against William Spicer. There is another crime that appears to be perpetrated by women and a crime solely for women, that of the scold. Much like bad speech, scolding was nagging, chastising, shouting, or speaking angrily. While men too were fined for this charge, they were in significantly lower numbers than women being put up to charge for this crime. So, what do the numbers say? Let's put this all into context. As you know, context is king. Was the medieval period all crime and murders? What is often touted is a study by Steven Pinker that asserts that the medieval period was particularly violent, and it was through the actions of civilization that we became less violent. This assertion is done by some tricky mathematics by running the coroner's rolls through a modern calculation for the homicide rate, which is to take the annual number of murders, divide by the population, and multiply by 100,000. To put this into context, medieval Oxford is cited in the study, had a homicide rate, according to the stats, of 110 murders per 100,000, based on 36 cases of homicide between the years of 1342 and 1348. This is a staggeringly high number, on par with some of the most dangerous cities in the world today. It should also be noted that during this period, Oxford experienced what was known as the Oxford riots, where students and locals battled in the streets for days over escalating tensions over the conduct of rowdy students. This is also likely to skew the numbers. Using Oxford as a case study is bad data analysis. That said, Oxford was a dangerous place. It turns out that medieval university towns, like modern university towns, had drunken frat boys who took to doing whatever they wanted. The difference is they were armed with swords. So, onto facts. Based off an aggregate of the Ear Court recorded from all counties in England, the homicide rate for the 13th century for England is more likely to be around 13 per 100,000 and 7.5 per 100,000 for the first half of the 14th century, a much more realistic number. This is on par with the homicide rates in the United States from the late 1960s to the early 1990s. Since I'm not from the States, you'll have to draw your own conclusions on that one. I think it is reasonable to say that the medieval period had crimes. People were violent and they had access to weapons. One thing leads to another. Is medieval Europe a hotbed of violent crimes? No, I don't think so. However, it is a place where community policing and self-defense takes place instead of a formal state police system. Speaking of which, the next video in the series will discuss how medieval people attempted to police themselves, so that should be really interesting. Now, if you did the right thing and watched the whole video, the giveaway. Here is how you win. First, like the video and subscribe if you have not already, because that's the polite thing to do. Next, comment below on this video. Entries will close on the 28th of March and we will draw on the 5th of April.
Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. Means you must have enjoyed the video. So like, comment and subscribe. And remember, stay safe, have fun, and keep reenacting.